episode 2 of Kickin It with Coach Mauricio Ruiz here, brought to you by Baptist Health. Coach, well received episode 1 of the podcast. You got a game in between. Just update me on how things are going.
Yeah, so we had a busy weekend.
Yeah.
We had our first game against College of Charleston. Very good opponent. First time head coach in Keith Higgins there. Good game. Game went going in our direction. They got a red card in the game, so we got a little dominance in the game, created a lot of chances. We're not able to put the game away in the way that we wanted to, created plenty of opportunities, really established the way we wanted to play, and the underlining, the positive takeaway from it is that we typically don't get to see teams early in the season that would just sit in, take it all in, and make it difficult for us. Teams want to win games, but when they go down a man in the second half, they just decided to kind of pack in a little bit more. So created a difficult environment for us that we need to be better at. We need to learn how to do it, but the silver lining is that we got to see that early in the season. Typically, we wouldn't necessarily prepare for that.
Right. What when it's for real, and then all of a sudden you're in an overtime game, and the dynamics of overtime are always interesting in the game of soccer already, with it being so different college to pro. Well, I mean, do you do much prep for an overtime situation in the preseason? And then what's it like just having to execute that in the first game of the year?
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of younger players, freshmen and international players, they don't know about the overtime rule.
Right.
So first of all, as you mentioned, because it's so different than regular soccer, and college soccer is specific in that way. So from substitution, rules are different, so they need to learn that as well. And then overtime. A lot of players in history, when we've gone to overtime, it was their first experience in college going overtime, they think the game is done. And so luckily we only had one freshman on the field at that moment, two freshmen at that moment. They knew, we had kind of talked about it, that the game was not done. Right? So the overtime, it's a little chaotic because it's still the sudden death rule, the golden goal rule. So we try to bring a little bit of calmness to the group, tranquility, and almost say we have 20 more minutes to play rather than first goal wins.
Right.
Certainly there's an urgency to it because you can't get scored on. But we want to also be able to be controlled, because otherwise if you're so chaotic, it's chaotic on both sides, and then one mistake can really cost you. So we try to bring some tranquility into it, let the guys know that we still have time and we don't have to get desperate just yet, which is what we did, and I thought we handled ourselves extremely well. But early in the season, to be able to go into overtime, still missing a handful of players due to COVID protocols and whatnot, I thought our guys physically handled themselves really well, which is ultimately the main challenge. And how are you going to be physically so early in the season when your game fitness isn't there yet? So I thought most of our guys, we had 8-9 guys that played the entire 110 minutes.
Wow, I mean, that's early on, probably feeling it in the legs a little bit there. But you had mentioned last time we spoke that guys came back in a little better shape maybe than a typical year where you're playing in the fall. You don't have as much time to ease into it. How'd you feel like we looked physically out there, being able to run that full 120?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that was probably the thing. We talked to the group last year that we were forced to make substitution patterns based on guys' fitness level in the past. When you've looked fatigued, we wanted to get you out of the game because otherwise you become a liability. That wasn't the case this year, right? I looked down the sideline and we're looking at, okay, how can we infuse a little bit of energy to the team, maybe a different player, dynamic into it. But the reality is, at that moment in time, I felt like we were controlling the game, and nobody on the field looked like they needed a break. They're still, kicking it all gears. So that's a really positive thing to know that while you have depth and you have other options, and we certainly made some of those changes, it wasn't because someone was lagging, because somebody wasn't giving it all. They were becoming a liability on the field. And ultimately, fitness becomes about that. Either you're a liability or you're not proposing a challenge for the opposition. And I thought both things that we're able to address pretty well. So it's a credit to the guys in their current fitness level and the depth of the team. As I mentioned, we're down a few guys still. Not everyone is eligible or ready to play. So it means that other guys had to step in and play longer minutes than anticipated, or different roles. So, we got to see that as well.
You're battling bizarre weather conditions all weekend. Everyone on campus was. We had softball games moved around. Add that layer to what you had to go through playing an overtime game with sort of the uncertainty of the weather. It's a little colder than normal than what we're used to in February in Jacksonville. The field held up pretty well for the most
yeah.
part. As if you can't tell, we're hanging out at Southern Oak Stadium today. Speak to that layer as we could just continue to throw layers at these kids throughout college athletics and spring.
I think us Floridians right now need to be really careful how much we complain about the weather.
Right, exactly.
Right, we still get to do this, but yeah, the storm that came over the weekend and really the amount of rain that we got this last week just compounded on the field. Right, so we had a game. The girls were able to get their game in on Sunday morning. We were not able to get our game in on Sunday afternoon. Charleston decided to stay, the possibility of play the next morning. So we were able to secure a second location, a turf field location at Providence High School in town. Grateful to them to be able to allow us to do that. But the weather cooperated overnight, and our field held up really well. Our administration, we came over and assessed the field, early in the morning. And gave the thumbs up. And so we got the game in. It's a little bit untraditional.
Sure.
As you mentioned, it's just another thing. When I had to break it to the players, and Charleston was the same situation. Both teams kicking off the season. First games had been canceled. Now we're getting ready to play. And storm is the reason why. And typically this is not a typical time for storms.
No, right. It's an odd time. Yeah.
For weather to be the reason why you're canceling the game, on top of everything else, players had to overcome that. And it was difficult for them when they received the message. But we made a vow to them that we're going to try to get the game in as quickly as possible, as early as possible, or if not, look to reschedule the game. So even though we played on 11 o'clock on a Monday morning, they had to miss class, they had to communicate with their professors that they were not going to be there, adjustments and collaboration all around from the department and the school, faculty. But we got the game in, and once the game got going, it didn't feel like 11 o'clock in the morning. Right? It wasn't hot, the weather was nice. So we got the game in, and we got a lot out of it.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, the running joke is when we play in the fall, is we build in lightning delays into the game plan, but don't expect that in February.
Not in February.
But always prepared, ready to pivot as we need to. We spoke a lot last time about mentality and managing the oddities of the spring 2020 into the fall 2020. When you go and have to deliver news like that where a game's being moved to the team, it's almost like you've built up that scar tissue a little bit. How do you feel about how the guys are now handling bizarre news like that? And how they're coping with it, and what are you guys doing to make sure they're hanging in there?
Yeah, I don't think you ever get used to bad news.
Sure.
Right? It's one of those things that you don't want to grow immune to them because it's not a normal part of life. You don't you understand that it's a part of life, but it's something that it takes a lot of resiliency and some integrity and a lot of self-talk to be able to kind of overcome that. So all we can do, as I mentioned before, is be as honest as we can with the players. Let them know what the plan is, right? And sometimes the plan has to change and adapt. But we talked to the guys about our greatest ability as humans is our ability to adapt.
Yeah.
Right? And we all possess that. Some of them, depending on when your emotional maturity is, you're able to adapt more or less, but we are able to adapt. So I think right now, our generation that are going through, this time, it's exactly about that. And it's going to bode well for us in the future, right?
Yeah.
For these young men and women that are going through this right now, where their quote-unquote identity is taken away through no fault of their own, they're struggling with that. They're struggling with the mental health piece of it. They're struggling how they associate. We're telling them they can't hang out, right? We kept telling them that they shouldn't eat at the caf together. They shouldn't hang out in their dorms together. They can't go out to a restaurant together because of the conditions that we're in. And then you add components that are now outside of their control.
Right.
That it's still limiting their opportunities. It's definitely something that can be taken lightly. It needs to be addressed, and we can't just assume that they're going to deal with it well, because it's not easy for us as head coaches to deal with, administrators to deal with, to have to pivot on the dime. So we definitely should anticipate or expect that they have to deal with it. So we need to make sure that how they're feeling, keep updating them after they want information. So even though it may not be new information, we just got to keep providing them status reports. So I think as long as we do that, then we try to be on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, and now looking around a little bit more holistically nationally, I don't know how much you've gotten a chance to kind of survey the environment. How have things started to take shape nationally? Now, there were some programs who were able to get in a fall.
Yeah.
But what's the outlook for just men's soccer in general out there nationally?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting semester, because when you scout teams, we're about to play FAU this week, and they've gone 2 games in. They played UNF and Stetson previously. But looking from game to game, you expect to see someone and then whatever situation they might be dealing with or we might be dealing with within their department, within their own team, you may give a different outlook to what you're expecting. So performance from performance may not be as consistent or grow at the rate as coaches would like to, which goes to speak on readiness, player readiness. Be ready to step in whenever the opportunity comes, because you don't know when our situation will shift. Just to get a little bit of insight, each conference has a different testing protocol. And so we're about to play 2 games this coming weekend against 2 different conferences. So we're testing 3 times this week.
Yeah.
And given false positives or false negatives or just the reality of what we might deal with, either them or us might have a positive case, which shifts everything.
Yeah.
It shifts the capacity to play certain players, certain roles, and depending how many are affected by contact tracing. So just readiness, right? Players that are not anticipating. We had a lot of guys that did not get minutes this past weekend against College of Charleston, right? How are they feeling about the fact that they didn't get minutes? Well, today we're going to address as our first opportunity back is be ready. Make sure as we do team video and kind of we learn from the game, you are learning as much, as the other players that did play, because you may not only get a call, but you may be able to, need to be supplementing a lot of minutes.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be normal around the country. I think everyone is really going to have an opportunity to address their team versus then addressing the other team too much. Obviously, we're still going to do our homework, but the lack of anticipation of how someone else is going to play, I think will play in our favor, so we can keep growing in our own way. And I think naturally, talking to the other coaches, that seems to be everybody's focus. Let's worry about what we can worry about, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and how our opponent is going to look like so much. So we'll do our homework. We'll be as prepared as we can. And it's challenging us as coaches to be prepared with a plan B and a plan C in case we see something different from that position, or we may have to do something different as well.
Yeah. Preview the weekend for me. The upcoming games. You just spoke to having to prepare for guys you may or may not see. And then also in preparing your own team, and we spoke about it a little bit last week. Do you incorporate anything into training, maybe even subliminally, preparing more guys just in case, putting them in more advanced situations, guys who you might not do that typically, or is that just your typical what you would do on training anyway?
Yeah, no. So we'll play FAU on Friday, and then we'll play Mercer on Sunday. Mercer had a fall season, a short version of a fall season. So Mercer has had some legs underneath them to understand who they are.
Sure.
They're a competitive team, difficult team to play with. And FAU has gone off to a really good start against 2 A-Sun opponents. They're currently undefeated. They've got 3 games under their belt. They had a tie as well. So we'll play against teams that have a little bit more experience under their belt than we do currently at the moment, based on the fact that we've only had 1 game.
Yeah.
So the next 2 days for us is really addressing a little bit of what we felt like we could improve on from the previous game, with a little bit of a mindset really from our coaches, rather than really giving it to the players, on how we're going to adjust training based on what we anticipate. Like if we do this better versus the opposition that we anticipate, we'll prepare ourselves, and really incorporating the whole group. Kind of to your second point, we have to make sure that we're giving enough guys reps, because on a 2-game weekend, playing within 48 hours, which is not as typical anymore for men's soccer.
Right.
It used to be just the norm.
Yeah.
It's not as normal anymore, but in this climate, trying to fit games in, we were able to fit those 2 games in. So really making sure the players understand the need for them to be ready, because playing Friday and Sunday is not an easy thing on the legs. It's actually not even recommended to do so. So having a depth in the roster allows us to do that well. So really this next 2 days is make sure the players understand their ability and their need to be ready to compete, whether they get big minutes either day or shared version of minutes on both days. That's something we're going to really making sure that our team collective mentality is in the right place.
What are you hoping to see more of, less of, done differently from your guys this weekend?
Yeah, I think we need to be a little bit braver, right? I think the players still have a little bit of that. They're a little conservative at the moment. They don't want to lose the game, and we're just trying to instill them that we want them to win the game, right? Let's get after the game. Let's get after our opponent, rather than just sitting back or not making a run because you don't think you may recover back. We're playing at home. Right, we have to be aggressive at home. We have to take chances and take risks at home. So we want to make sure the players, that's hopefully what we can provide them in some of the video sessions, that we're going to do this week on reviewing tape. Moments in the previous game where we thought we could have been a little more aggressive, a little bit braver on the ball and some of our runs. And so hopefully that's what we can do this weekend, is be a little bit braver and create more clear-cut chances rather than those kind of called half chances.
Right.
We create a lot of half chances against Charleston. We should have put some of them away, but we want to create more clear-cut chances against our opposition, which are going to be good opposition, but it'll be a really good test for us.
That's great. Anything you want to wrap up with? Any parting shots here?
No, just a busy time,
Yeah.
kind of coming up. I think, JU Athletics has probably our busiest weekend of the spring coming up.
Might be.
So many games, and
Yeah.
we're fortunate to be able to have this facility. We're sitting underneath the Loftman Cottage, which is an idea inspired from Tony Loftman that was a huge contributor to this facility when it was built several years ago, that we now get to call our home. But it's inspired from Fulham, the Fulham Cottage, back in England. So it has a little bit of that feel to it. So we're So we hope our fans come out. There's plenty, as you can see on our field, plenty of standing room around. Our stands are right underneath us here. It's a great facility to come, but otherwise, just kind of start coming back into campus a little bit.
Yep.
Right, kind of get that feeling of a home game. I think that's what our players are looking for. Forward to that.
That's great, and of course, stay tuned to JUDolphins.com for updates. Jax_MSOC on all the social medias. It's JaxMSoc to keep up to date on all the happenings, changes, or just straight up game coverage, because it's game time. Coach, thanks for hanging out a little bit, and we will catch up with you next time. This has been another episode of Kickin It with Coach Ruiz, brought to you by Baptist Health. Thanks for hanging out.